How can I be more vulnerable in my relationship without feeling exposed? That's one of the questions I'm going to answer in today's episode. And we're talking all about feminine communication, what it is, how to use it, and just how to embody it in your relationship. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Secret Formula of Femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Montero, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Nicole, your guide on this journey to really tapping into your feminine essence and enhancing your femininity. And so today's topic is super important because it's something that a lot of women miss, especially in their relationship. And it's that art of feminine communication. And so I want to explain to you what it is. We're going to unveil it. We're going to pull back the curtain on feminine communication, some tips on how to actually implement it, why it's so important. But first, I want to start with a story. So sometimes I'll tell you a story about myself. Sometimes it'll be about somebody that I've worked with or a compilation of women that I've worked with. And this story is kind of a combination. It's me, but I've also heard this from so many of the women that I have worked with. And so there was a time where I actually struggled to express myself. Being that ultra sensitive child, I was afraid that if I really shared my feelings, I would, as the first question that I stated said, be too vulnerable. And so I used to try to hold back what I was feeling, but that didn't really work. But then I wasn't so comfortable. And so it was this awkward stage. Now imagine going into your marriage and not knowing that you feel a certain way, but being afraid to express that vulnerability, feeling like, well, it's almost like, well, you go first, right? Like, I don't want to be vulnerable first. You do it first. But then that's not true vulnerability. And it's not really being authentic. And so I had to really get into that mindset of like, I'm going to go all in. This is something that we don't talk enough about as far as marriage and relationships. You have to go all in. You have to be willing, as they say, to risk it all, right? Like, not risk it all in terms of being careless, but in terms of being willing to share who you are. That is going to be the thing that's going to make the relationship stronger. And so I had to really come to terms with the fact that like it was okay to say things that I was scared to say, or to have difficult conversations, or to bring up things that I knew would maybe not be the easiest thing to discuss, but by not bringing it up, it wasn't helping either, right? So part of the feminine communication that I had to come to terms with or accept was being comfortable expressing the feelings that were naturally there for me, and almost going back to what was my nature. My nature is to feel and to express. But somehow along the way, like many women, I got the message like, girl, do not do that. Protect yourself. And when we take that mindset even into our marriages or our important relationships, we're doing it harm, right? So, like many women, I was that woman that had to say, you know what? It's important to take a risk. And the more and more that I became vulnerable, the more I understood the power of feminine communication. And I will never forget hearing a man who was talking about his marriage talk about the fact that, like, how do I know that she needs me to protect her if she's never vulnerable, right? I've heard this time and time again. And I could literally see that play out for myself. The more I allowed myself, being vulnerable is like you don't know where it's going to lead. But what you do know is that you can no longer hold those things in, or act like something doesn't bother you, or act like you have it all together. And so I had to learn that, like, the more I just allowed myself to lean into that, I was actually being and embodying my femininity. Now, this is not to say that men and masculinity has nothing to do with vulnerability. But what I'm saying is, too many times, women, one of the ways that we're cut off from our femininity and our feminine essence is that we disconnect from the feelings, we disconnect from the vulnerability, and therefore we disconnect from that like sweet art of feminine communication. And ask any man who's married or who is like truly committed to his woman, what are some of the things that keeps him connected and draws him in? And he probably won't say the feminine communication, but that's what he's going to describe. He's going to say things like, she tells me how she feels, even though it's scary, or even though she doesn't know how I'm going to react. And that softens me up. And that makes me want to lean in and hear what she has to say. And it makes me want to protect her, even if it means I have to soften up and protect her, right? And these are things that I have literally heard. So that feminine communication, you know how we say the masculine and the feminine, they complement each other and they have their own characteristics and strengths, and they help each other to thrive. And the feminine communication and tapping into that vulnerability and those feelings and those emotions and like that raw authenticity, that is, it's both disarming and it's magnetic or attractive. And so it will literally soften up your masculine man. It will literally draw and attract the kind of understanding and protection that you're looking for. Now, of course, I've heard people say, well, that doesn't work. If you're in a relationship that isn't safe, or you're in a relationship where even at your most sincere and honest and like open, a person has disregard for you, they don't care, they don't seem concerned, then those are signs, those are red flags. Because it's one thing to have communication problems. And that's one of the questions that was sent to me that I'm going to answer in a little bit about how do you deal with someone like if you're in a relationship and he's not communicative. It's one thing to have communication problems. It's another thing to be in a situation where you are completely dismissed and disregarded and, no care or concern or consideration for you. So you need to know the difference between those two. And you feel it in your gut, you feel it in your core. But a lot of times what happens is the couple is having a communications impasse, and the woman has lost touch with her feminine communication skills. And a lot of times our men have lost touch too with sort of how to be present and how not to take it personally and how to hear and how to connect with his woman and allow her to be soft. And that has to be dealt with. But for us ladies, a lot of times we have really lost connection with the art of feminine communication. So one thing about feminine communication is it's really like this balanced way of approaching things. It's how to be both gentle but also assertive. And so people sometimes mix it up and they feel like it's about being passive or never having anything to say. But it's not. It's really about embracing your true nature. Remember I told you in the story, like part of it was I had gotten to a phase where I felt like I had to be the opposite of what was my nature. And if you're really nurtured in a healthy environment, you will really connect to your nature. Now, a lot of people haven't been because of different traumas and different attachment issues and abandonment. And that's when the inner work has to take place for them to be able to reconnect to that open nature that like all kids should have as they go into adulthood. So Feminine communication is not being passive or quiet. It's embracing that natural way of relating to people, using your intuition, your empathy. The empathy is key, and your emotional intelligence to connect to your partner. Now, emotional intelligence is an awareness of both how you feel and what's going on with you emotionally, but also how the other person feels and what's going on with them emotionally. And how do you want to navigate that? So that is emotional intelligence. The same way we talk about intellectual intelligence, where you take in information, you interpret it, you figure out how what to do with it, right? You read your environment. Well, an emotional intelligence, you're reading the room, you're reading the emotional temperature for yourself and for the other person. And so that's part of feminine communication. It is, I would say, it's gentle yet impactful. Some of the most impactful things are are low key and gentle. It's soft yet strong, and it's also about being true to who you are while still being able to connect to the other. So it's all of these I would say the key word is balance. It's the soft and the strong. It's the gentle and the impactful. It is being you, but also still being able to connect to the other. And just let's pause and think about that. That is, imagine how powerful that is. My friends always laugh at me. They say, "That's your word, Nicole, powerful." But truly, because I'm so interested in all of the different ways that we show our power. And I think a way that we have overlooked, especially when it comes to us as women, is that our femininity is so powerful. And we don't it doesn't always have to be like the outwardly aggressive. You can be gentle and assertive at the same time. And that's when you've truly mastered the art of feminine communication. Now, it can be challenging, especially in your intimate relationship, if you haven't practiced it a lot, or if you haven't accepted it as a strength. If you think of your feminine communication as something you only do like when you're being romantic or to be sensual, you think of it as this sexual thing, then you're missing the boat. And it's going to be hard for you to really put it into practice. You have to see it as part of your being and your aura. That you can be assertive, you can be, but also gentle, you can be strong and also soft, and all of those things that I mentioned earlier. So part of it is the mindset, is letting go of misconceptions that tell you that it's only reserved for the bedroom. And in every other part of your life or your relationship, you're going more into a masculine mode. So that's what happens with a lot of people. They're like, okay, it's almost like I can only speak sweetly when I have my lingerie on. And it should be the exact opposite. So that's a mindset shift. Another challenge for many, many women is that fear of vulnerability. So many people feel like it makes them weak. It puts them in a position of being taken advantage of. They don't want to be overly emotional. A lot of women have the goal of having a poker face at all times. And if you think about it, right, like a poker face is you can't read it. You don't know what's really what that person is holding. And that's the opposite of what you want, especially in your relationship. So that fear of vulnerability and not understanding that that is the key to a deeper connection. And, a lot of people talk about it, but it is hard to embody. And I know for a fact, I often struggle with exactly what to share. But I had to understand that vulnerability isn't about the number of details that you share about things. Like some of us are a little bit more private, but it's about getting to the heart of the feelings and how you may have felt uncomfortable and how you may have felt in a way that wasn't easy to feel it. But when you share that, another person can relate to it. So it really is a door opener. And so when you're in your relationship, if you cannot be vulnerable, what you're saying is to you, this person, you're my lover, you're my husband, you're all of these things, right? I have all these labels for you, but I'm not willing to trust you enough to share these parts of you, of myself with you. And when we say we don't trust the other, a lot of times it comes back to not trusting ourselves. And so when we really trust that vulnerability is actually a strength and that we're going to be okay, that was what I had to come to terms with. I am going to be okay regardless of, if I feel hurt or if a person doesn't respond exactly how I wanted them to, or if a person disappoints me, I'm still going to be okay. And once you realize that, once you come to that conclusion and you realize that you're going to be okay, it allows you to lean into that discomfort or lean into those difficult feelings. Because one of the things that we want to practice, especially in feminine communication, is allowing ourselves to experience a whole range of emotions. And you've probably said this to kids if you're around kids, or you've heard people say this to kids, like there's no bad feelings. All feelings are valid, because you want children to not shut down or suppress their feelings. But we also have to really learn that as adults, that instead of trying to push away feelings because we don't want to be vulnerable or we don't want to feel uncomfortable, that what we really have to do is allow ourselves to have all the feelings and trust that we will be okay, even if we feel those feelings, and then take it a step further and allow ourselves, like, test it out. Trust the person that you're in this relationship with. That maybe a lot of people are sharing their bodies, but they refuse to share their emotions. Let me say that again, right? There are a lot of us who are sharing our bodies, our most intimate parts of ourselves, but we refuse to share our feelings and to share other aspects. It's almost like we feel more naked being vulnerable about our feelings than we do when we're literally naked without our clothes on. So that vulnerability, I'm going to say it over and over and over again. When you meet somebody, if you meet two people and one is being very, very kind of heady, they're talking information and facts, and then the other person is leading more with something relatable or a story or something that kind of shows their humanness or a vulnerability about themselves, you usually are going to gravitate more to that second person. You're going to feel safer with that second person, the one who's leading with the emotion and the vulnerability. So think about it in your relationship. Think about your man. Like he is going to feel more attracted and more connected and safer when you are able to be more vulnerable. And that's one of our strengths in our feminine communication and just with femininity. In some ways, you may have to go first, right? Because when a man is more in his, and he's in his masculine energy, he's in that sort of outwardly protective mode. And so in order for him to be vulnerable, he has to know it's safe as well. We look for safety as women, but so do men are looking for safety cues for emotional safety. And so when you take that first step of vulnerability, then that is a signal that it is safe. It is safe for you to do the same thing. It's safe for you to let your guard down. And it's safe for you to be protective of me as I do more of this. So That's the sequence of it. In your feminine communication, you may have to take that first step. You put your toe in the water first. You show that you're willing to take some risks first. There are also some challenges in terms of misunderstanding softness. People think that that has to do with being a pushover. It absolutely does not. I was telling a couple of friends this week about 3 separate situations where the fruits of me pouring into having healthy boundaries, they were blossoming. The fruits were that they were flowering, like the harvest was coming, where I had spent time making sure I communicated my boundaries in certain situations, some to people that were close to me, some it had to do more with acquaintances and business and things like that. And what happened is those boundaries, those things I had poured into healthy boundaries, they didn't necessarily blossom right away. But eventually, like this past week, different things happened where either a person would kind of apologize or acknowledge that they were out of line, or the case of someone that I didn't know well, but had to have contact with, they just stopped doing the thing when I spoke up about why I didn't like it. So I was establishing boundaries. And that has nothing to do with being soft or hard. You can totally establish healthy boundaries when you're being soft. So that misunderstanding is that your softness is being a pushover. But it's not. It is absolutely not about being weak. It's again that balance between gentleness and assertiveness. I can have the same voice that I have, but I can use a serious tone to be assertive and to be clear in my communication when I'm assertive and letting a person know that they are crossing a line that I'm not pleased with, that I'm not going to allow, that I am not going to let them do that. So it's not about being hard or harsh. It's about being clear and assertive. And part of it is when you know your worth, you can have that clarity without going into being unkind or a whole other mode. One thing I always say is I have something that I call an inner superiority complex. Like I think really highly of myself, and I have worked on myself so much to where I have a sense of my value and my worth. And just because somebody else makes a choice to treat me in a way or to do things that are unkind or whatever it is that they're doing, or even if it's someone that I'm close to and they disappoint me, or they do something I don't like, I'm able to separate that person's actions and their choice to do those actions from my own self-worth. It doesn't make me feel worse about myself. Just because I'm hurt doesn't mean my self-esteem or my self-worth is impacted. And so another part of that with my what I call inner superiority complex is that there aren't a lot of things that are going to take me out of character. So even in some of those situations that I described where I had to set boundaries, one with someone that I don't really know well, but I have to have contact with, I'm still not going to go out of character. I'm going to say what I have to say. I'm going to make it clear, but it doesn't mean I have to act in a way that later on I'm going to regret because it took me out of character. So that's why I call it an inner superiority complex. You're not going to I've had people say some crazy things and it's like, I'm not responding to that. I'm either going to ignore you. I'm going to look at you and be assertive in saying that's not acceptable, to stop. I might physically put a space between us. But as far as going low to where you are, I don't want to do that. And that's part of what I call my inner superiority complex. So that's where some of the misunderstandings about being soft come in, because for some women, they feel it's weak. And if that's you, then it really, you got to switch that mindset in order to really be in your feminine communication. The other thing that can be hard for some women is balancing the assertiveness with their femininity. And so you don't have to choose between the two, they can coexist. What helps them to not be in conflict is the boundaries. And so when you don't have boundaries, you either get walked all over or you pretend that it doesn't bother you, but it does, and then you start feeling a lot of resentment and anger inside, and then you explode. And so when you're balancing the two, you're understanding how to communicate your boundaries with grace. Oh my gosh, there is nothing that I enjoy more than setting boundaries, but doing it in a way with that graceful flair or with that smile. And then if I need to put a little more like oomph into it, I can do that, right? So it's having all of those different levels, those different notes of your communication. That's the strength of feminine communication. I remember I once made a funny video, and I was like in my kitchen, and I love to cook different spices and seasonings and ingredients. And I was like, feminine communication is like your best, most well seasoned recipe. It's not just a bland piece of meat with just some salt on it, right? It's like a nice tenderized sirloin steak, or let's just do salmon, right? Because I like to really season my salmon. But it's like having that nice, fresh, organic piece of salmon, and you have the different seasonings. You might have some butter and some lemon and some garlic powder or paprika, or if you like cumin, coriander, more of your Eastern seasonings, right? Like whatever the different flavors are that all come together and meld together. And when you bake it, they just blend together. That is feminine communication. So, what does some of the research say? I love looking at the research, right? So, there's three areas. One is feminine communication in relationships. It's when a woman is able to engage in expressing her emotions, she experiences higher levels of satisfaction in her relationship. So she feels more satisfied. So one is like expressing your emotions. It is been shown has been shown to lead to a sense of satisfaction in the relationship. The other thing is the Gottman Institute. I always talk about this. I'm trained in the Gottman couples therapy approach, and they've done so much research with like tens of thousands of couples, all of the things that either lead to a healthy path in your relationship or are leading you towards destruction and breakup, especially in your marriage. And so they found that women who express their concerns in a gentle and calm manner are more likely to resolve conflicts effectively with their partners. So think about that. It's not the hollering and in screaming, because again, what happens is when you can do it in a calm and gentle manner, that shows a level of confidence in what you're trying to communicate. It shows a level of I'm standing on business, right? I don't have to get dramatic in order for you to get what I'm saying, right? You can pick up what I'm putting down because I'm confident while I'm still in that calm and gentle manner. Okay. And then a third area where there's been some really key research is that vulnerability in communication between couples is one of the things that what they call it is it's a predictor of intimacy in your relationship. So basically, the higher your level of vulnerability or ability to be vulnerable in communication, then the higher your levels of intimacy in your relationship, right? And so then the opposite is true too. The less you're able to be vulnerable, the less intimacy, emotional intimacy that's felt as connection, safety, a sense of belonging with that person, that goes up the more you're able to take those risks and be vulnerable in your communication. And it goes down the less you're willing to take those risks. So just think about that. Emotional communication leading to higher satisfaction in the relationship, calm, gentle communication leading to better conflict resolution, and more vulnerability in the relationship leading to higher levels of intimacy that you experience in your relationship. So think about the things that I said. The salmon with all the seasonings and all of the spices coming together, that's feminine communication. And then the benefits are in these different areas of intimacy, conflict resolution, and feeling satisfied in your relationship. So what are some of the different types of communication that play a role in nurturing your relationship? There's three key areas. There's verbal communication, there's nonverbal communication, and there's active listening. So we all know verbal communication, that's what we tend to focus on. It's like the spoken word, the words you use to express your thoughts and feelings. Sometimes as women, we think that that is the end all and be all. Like as long as I'm running my mouth, then I'm communicating. But then there's nonverbal communication, which is just as important. That's your body language, your facial expressions, eye contact, tone of voice. Ladies, what have I said? My key framework is when you're communicating, it's time, space, and tone. Those three things are key. The timing of what you're going to say, learning how to give enough space after you say something or before you say it, and your tone of voice. Those things are part of the nonverbal communication. And just think about how impactful they are and how they can either signal to your partner, okay, this is a safe place, or they can signal the opposite, that I'm defensive, I don't want to hear it, it's my way or the highway. So that's nonverbal communication. And then the third type of communication is active listening. So listening is just as important as speaking. And that's why I joked, I said, a lot of times if we're running our mouths as women, we think we're communicating, but it's so much deeper. How much are you listening and actively listening? Are you engaging? Are you curious? And are you trying to understand their perspective? Are you curious, even if it's a perspective that is completely different than yours? And that's one of the things that I really enjoy in some of my discussions with my husband. We see a lot of things similarly, core values and so forth, but there are other things that we see very differently. And I would invite couples who are differing on some key things, whether it's politics or other things, to get curious about the other person's perspective and not just shut them down or dismiss it because it's different from how you see it. So the active listening is the third level of communication that is like really, really important. All right. So what are some tips for strengthening your feminine communication? How can you be that woman who is a master of feminine communication? One is start off with empathy. Like I was just saying, be curious about your partner's perspective. Have empathy for things that they might be feeling, even if you don't fully understand it. So things like if you're talking about sensitive topics, things that they haven't felt comfortable expressing because it's new to them, have empathy. Have a sense of, I might not fully understand it, but I can truly see how you could feel the way you feel, or I feel that feeling. Like I can put myself in your shoes. The other thing is learn to practice not just expressing your feelings, but having some confidence. And that goes back to the part of what I was saying about When you start to trust yourself more, you're able to take those risks and being vulnerable. So you don't have to be, I'm sorry, I don't want to, offend you. Like, stand on business, right? Be confident. That's where that soft but strong, that assertive but gentle comes in. Be confident and take ownership. Don't do the blame game. You never listen to me, right? Oh, I love when you're present with me when I'm talking because I feel like we're connecting and I feel like you're hearing me and seeing me, and that makes me want to listen to you more, right? Put that spin on it. Put that sweet feminine spin on it. Also, when you understand that your softness is a strength, and so you have to psych yourself out if this is how you feel of this idea that if you're not harsh or hard, you're going to be taken advantage of. It's actually the opposite. Try to lean into your kindness, your compassion, while also knowing that you can be clear and you can state what you need to state. But then you got to give it some room, step back and let it breathe. And then setting boundaries, like I was saying a little bit earlier. You want to do it in a way that's graceful. You want to share that this is a boundary, this is a limit, this is something that you're not comfortable with, or these are things that you are comfortable with, like whatever you're trying to express, and put it out there. But don't holler and scream it. Just say it with clarity, with confidence, give it a pause, and let the other person take it in. And of course, I'm talking about in your relationship. So that's different than someone out on the street. But you want to give that person some time to really consider and take in what you've said, what you've communicated to them. And then you want to, in your relationship, learn to model vulnerability. You have to put your toe in the water first sometimes. And once you put your toe in, he'll put his toe in. Think of feminine communication as this superpower that allows another person to feel safe in your presence, that allows your partner to feel like they can truly connect with and communicate with you. And then they want to make you feel the same way. So it becomes a two-way street. So let's get into some questions. You know, I love the questions. And that was the first one that I started the segment off with because someone said to me, how can I be more vulnerable in my relationship without feeling exposed? And it's one of those things that it's really gradual. But I want you to understand that being exposed is not a bad thing. Because if you're not exposed, it may feel uncomfortable to feel like you're being exposed, but the actual being exposed is not a bad thing. Because if you're in a relationship and you're not exposed, exposed just means that you can be seen by the other. You're out there, you're not hidden. And if you think about it, in a relationship, you don't want to be hidden. Because if you're hidden, then you're hiding even from yourself. Because you can't be in a relationship having a mask on all the time. So it's okay to be exposed. And actually, the more you practice it, the less it's going to feel like a threat to you. It's not going to feel threatening. It's going to feel like, okay, this is just part of the process. I'm trusting the process. The other question number 2 is, how do I communicate my needs without coming across as too demanding? Yeah. So I was the opposite. I was afraid of not so much being too demanding, but like I was in that mindset of like, I don't want to come across as weak. And so I was putting on a mask that was actually covering up my emotions. But it's back to knowing which A to pick. We want you to pick the A for assertiveness, not the A for aggression. Aggression is a reactive stance. Assertiveness is proactive. And so when you're talking, what you can do is you can frame your needs as something in the relationship that's beneficial, not just to you, but to both of you. I tell my kids even now, when mommy's good, when I'm rested, when I'm taken care of, y'all are going to be good. And that's the same kind of communication in a relationship. If I hold my feelings and my needs in, we're not going to be the relationship isn't going to be good. So, as I'm sharing my needs, I'm framing it as this is something that's beneficial, not just to me, but to our relationship and ultimately to you. So, if you wanted to say something like you want your partner to spend more time with you, instead of saying you need to spend more time with me, you could say, I feel more connected to you when we spend quality time together. Right? So you want to shift it from a demand to a shared desire. You're not trying to be demanding. You're trying to share what you desire. And that actually is, that is wildly magnetically attractive. I've heard men say it like when she tells me what she needs and she opens up about what she wants, I want to give it to her. Okay? So give it a try. Think about you're being assertive, not aggressive, and you're framing your needs as something that's beneficial, not just to you, but to the both of you in the relationship. And you're sharing not a demand, but a desire. So actually, this time I have a third question. And this is from someone that says, how can I improve communication if my partner is not very communicative? And so this is the part where I said the feminine communication is very rich. It has different tones, different notes, different seasonings and spices. So think about what you need to be able to create a safe, non-judgmental space for conversations. One of the key things is listening more than you're talking. So I know it can be hard, especially if the person is not very communicative. You might feel uncomfortable in the silence and you might try to fill up the silence and talk. And that's going to be like a vicious cycle because it's not really going to create a safe environment where they're going to take that risk, right? And it's not that you're trying to make them, you're not trying to make it unsafe, but that's just the nature of how communication is. The more you listen, the more you pause and slow down, the more the other person is going to feel like they have space to jump in and that it's safe for them to do so. So you also want to be very patient and express to them like your desire to connect with them more deeply. And think about those three types of communications. So not just the words, but you can also not just pay attention to your nonverbals, but pay attention to theirs. Like a lot of times people will give you that signal that, hey, I'm testing you or I'm trying to see if it's safe for me to open up a little bit more. And you want to do things like show that you're fully present, make eye contact, put the phone down, don't multitask in that moment, and listen without asking or bombarding the person with a lot of questions. Because nothing shuts a person down more than a lot of nitpicky questions. Fall back, let it breathe, listen, be present, and let them know that you're patient and that you're going to allow it to unfold. So those were our three questions for today. I want to thank you for joining me on today's episode. And I go much deeper into this topic of feminine communication in my community, the the Boundaries to Bliss Society. We have a whole community of women who are on the path of really tapping into their feminine essence, having healthy boundaries, and enhancing their relationships so they can experience fulfilling, healthy relationships. And so, if you want to know more about the community, make sure you click the link in the show notes. And you'll also see the link for my book, The Boundaries to Bliss Blueprint, for women who are finally ready to win at love. And I also go into more detail with some of these topics around feminine communication, healthy boundaries in a relationship, and self-love. So until next time, make sure that you continue to embrace your power, nurture your spirit, and let your feminine essence shine. I'll see you next time. This is Dr. Nicole.